In one of the most arid and enigmatic regions of the planet, something extraordinary is happening. What for centuries was synonymous with desolation and judgment is beginning to emit signs of renewal. The Dead Sea, known for its extreme saline density and inability to sustain life, is changing. The fissures in its soil not only reveal its rapid recession, but now unveil something even more astonishing: pools of fresh water. And within some of these pools, the impossible has become visible: living fish. What seemed merely a geological phenomenon has become, for spiritual eyes, tangible evidence of an ancient prophecy beginning to unfold before us. For decades, scientists, environmentalists, and governments discussed possible solutions to the depletion of the Dead Sea. Proposals ranged from intercontinental canals and water pipelines to climate preservation efforts. But none of them managed to halt the continuous decline of its water level. The shores have receded kilometers, revealing craters that open unpredictably, the infamous sinkholes, swallowing roads, palm trees, and abandoned structures. What was once a deep blue coastline has now become cracked, silent land. Yet something new has begun to emerge in these fissures: fresh water, creeping vegetation, and more recently, schools of small fish swimming in waters that, until not long ago, seemed cursed by death. For many, it is merely a geological mystery; for others, a coincidence. But for those who believe in the Holy Scriptures, it is a clear sign, a silent trumpet sounding from the soil of Israel. It is impossible to witness this transformation without recalling the vision of the prophet Ezekiel, recorded over 2 millennia ago. In that vision, Ezekiel is taken in spirit to a new temple in Jerusalem. From there, a small stream of water begins to flow. At first shallow, then deep, the stream becomes a river that flows eastward, crossing the Judean desert and reaching the Dead Sea. Ezekiel writes, "Then he brought me to the entrance of the temple, and behold, waters were flowing from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, and these waters went down into the Arabah and reached the sea. When they were brought to the sea, the waters of the sea became healthy." Ezekiel 47:1-8. Further on, the prophet declares, "And wherever this river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish." Ezekiel 47:9. For centuries, this text was interpreted by many as purely symbolic, a metaphor about the restoration of Israel, or the coming of God's Spirit. But what do we do when the impossible begins to manifest exactly as described? The Dead Sea, centuries-long barren, corrosive, and a symbol of judgment over Sodom and Gomorrah, is now beginning to show signs of life. The narrative of Genesis shows us that this region, before divine judgment, was fertile like Eden. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. Genesis 13:10. But because of the iniquity of its inhabitants, God sent fire from heaven, consuming Sodom and Gomorrah, and turning that fertile valley into a desert. Since then, the Dead Sea became a symbol of what happens when humanity rejects God's path. But God is not only a God of judgment, He is above all the God of restoration. Ezekiel in chapter 36 foretells that the same people scattered among the nations would return to their land, and that God would purify them with clean water, give them a new heart, and put a new spirit within them. Ezekiel 36:24-26. These words are not only about the physical body of Israel. They point to something deeper: the regeneration of the spirit, the revival of faith, the reconnection of the people with their Creator. The emergence of fresh water in the fissures of the Dead Sea has become a visible symbol of this renewal. But it doesn't stop there. Some of these pools have vegetation growing around them. Others already show chemical properties different from the original composition of the Dead Sea. And the fact that fish are surviving in these areas defies logical explanation. Scientists theorize that they could be underground springs or infiltrations connected to the Jordan River. But no explanation diminishes the impact of knowing that Ezekiel, thousands of years ago, described this with prophetic precision. And he was not the only one. The prophet Zechariah also wrote that, on the day of divine intervention, living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half to the western sea. Zechariah 14:8. The eastern sea is undoubtedly the Dead Sea. And the promise comes accompanied by another, even grander truth: the Lord will be king over all the earth. In that day there will be one Lord, and his name one. Zechariah 14:9. These words reveal that the miracle in the Dead Sea is not merely ecological nor exclusively symbolic. It is a preparation, a silent warning that the days are shortening, that God's plan is unfolding before our eyes, and that, just as the dry soil begins to receive life, so too will hardened hearts be touched by the living water of the Spirit. Israel, as a nation, has already begun to rise. After centuries of dispersion, it returned to its land. It rebuilt its cities, reforested deserts, and became one of the most influential technological hubs in the world. But the greatest miracle is not only in its politics or economy. It is in the spiritual awakening that is beginning to take place. A growing number of Jews are recognizing Jesus, Yeshua, as the promised Messiah. They are the first fruits of a harvest that the prophets foresaw. And just as the Dead Sea will become a place of life, so too will the heart of Israel be fully restored. In this prophetic scenario, every crack in the soil of the Dead Sea is like a trumpet announcing that the word of God is being fulfilled. And every fish swimming in a once desolate pool is like an echo of the Spirit saying, "He who promised is faithful, and he is coming." The word of God never returns empty. Every detail that Ezekiel wrote was carefully recorded under divine inspiration, not only for his time, but for ours. When he spoke of waters flowing from the temple and bringing life to the desert, many scoffed or considered it mere metaphor. But now that these waters are beginning to appear, literally, the world watches in silence. A silence akin to that which hung over the heavens when Jesus was crucified. A heavy, expectant silence. Something is about to happen, and it is increasingly difficult to ignore the signs. The book of Revelation confirms this prophetic thread. John the Apostle, exiled on Patmos, saw a river similar to Ezekiel's, a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, Revelation 22:1. On the banks of this river, fruit-bearing trees sprouted, yielding fruit every month, and their leaves were for the healing of the nations. This convergence between Old Testament prophets and New Testament apostles shows that God is telling a single story, the story of complete restoration, of the land, the human heart, and the kingdom. But this restoration begins with Israel. In Romans 11, Paul declares that the fall of Israel brought reconciliation to the world, and that their acceptance will bring something even deeper, life from the dead, Romans 11:15. This is not just a metaphor. It is a prophecy of global spiritual resurrection, anchored in the rebirth of a people who, for centuries, were persecuted, scattered, and rejected. The return of the Jewish people to their land is not just political, it is spiritual, and the Dead Sea, being healed before our eyes, is like a mirror of this transformation. Let us consider for a moment, why would God choose precisely the Dead Sea to be the stage for such a visible miracle? Why not a lush river like the Nile or a fertile plain like the Jezreel Valley? Because the Dead Sea represents the extreme, the place where nothing lives, where judgment fell, where the heavens sent fire upon cities that openly defied holiness. It is there, at the lowest point on earth, that God chooses to begin the process of healing. This says much about his character. He begins with the most broken places, and if he can restore the Dead Sea, he can restore anything, including you. In recent decades, over 6,000 sinkholes have been discovered around the Dead Sea. Many appear overnight, swallowing everything around them. But within some of them, amidst the collapse, springs of life emerge, fresh water, vegetation, movement. It is as if the desert itself is breathing again, as if the dry bones of Ezekiel 37 are gaining sinews and flesh, not only in people but in the soil, the body of the earth responding to the word of the Creator. These signs also warn us about the time we are living in. Jesus, when teaching about the last days, mentioned that there would be signs in the earth, in the heavens, in the waters, and among the nations. He spoke of birth pains, of fig trees sprouting, and also that the generation that sees these things will not pass away until all is fulfilled. We are seeing, we are living, and we must be awake, because the same God who made fish spring forth in the craters of the Dead Sea will soon make the final trumpet sound. And when it sounds, there will be no more time for preparation. Therefore, the emergence of life in the Dead Sea is more than a geological curiosity. It is a call to vigilance. It is God saying, "What I promised, I am fulfilling. What I prophesied is beginning to move. We do not know whether the complete healing of the Dead Sea will happen before or after Jesus' return, but we know that every step of this process points us to a glorious outcome, the day when the King will set his feet on the Mount of Olives, and from it, life will flow to the valley below. Zechariah said that the mountain will split in two, creating a new path for the living waters to pass, a literal crack in the geology of prophecy. And it is not only the earth that is reacting, the people are also responding. In Israel, a growing number of Jews are having dreams about Jesus. They are searching the scriptures. They are reading Isaiah 53 with new eyes. And what was once a rejected Messiah is now beginning to be recognized as the promised anointed one. The same Jesus who was baptized in the waters of the Jordan River, not far from there. The same one who healed the sick, multiplied loaves, and wept for Jerusalem. Therefore, when you hear of fish in the Dead Sea or fresh water in craters of salt, do not think only of phenomena. Think of promises that are fulfilled with precision. Think of how God never forgets a single verse of his word, and that, if he is being faithful to prophecies from millennia ago, he will also be faithful to what he said about your life, your home, and your future. It is time to look to Israel. It is time to return to the scriptures. It is time to hear the sound of the spiritual trumpet resonating from the dry valley. The same God who restored the exiles, who reborn a people after the Holocaust, who healed the soil of a scorched land, is restoring hearts. Hearts that were once like the Dead Sea, hardened, arid, isolated, but now touched by the living water, they are pulsing again. You can be one of those hearts. Perhaps your life has cracks, dead areas, spaces where nothing seems to flourish anymore. But the same God who is making life spring forth where there was only salt can work an even greater miracle in you. He promised to give a new heart. He promised to put his Spirit within us. And that promise does not fail. It does not depend on climate, politics, or science. It depends on one thing alone, faith. If there is anything the Dead Sea teaches us today, it is that not even the deadest place is beyond the reach of the living God. So no matter how late it seems, how dark it is, or how impossible it sounds, if he spoke, he will do. And if fish have returned to the Dead Sea, you too can return to life. The restoration is happening. The earth is responding. The scriptures are being fulfilled, and Jesus is coming.